At 2:17 a.m., when the neighbor heard the scream slice through the quiet suburban night, it sounded less like fear and more like realization. The kind of sound a person makes when they finally understand that the man standing in front of them is not who he claims to be. And by the time police arrived, blood was already drying on the kitchen tiles. The windows were open though it was winter, and the man who lived there was gone, leaving behind only a name that did not belong to him and a life that, from that night on, would begin to split cleanly into two opposing truths. This story begins years earlier, long before the crime scene tape, long before investigators would label it one of the most disturbing true crime cases in the dark case files archive. Back when the man was known as Daniel Foster, a quiet, reliable consultant living in a modest house on the edge of Brookvale, a town so unremarkable that nothing ever stayed secret for long, except, it turned out, the most important secret of all. Daniel was known as polite, almost forgettable, a man who jogged every morning, attended community fundraisers, and worked remotely for a logistics company that no one ever questioned, because his paychecks were regular and his explanations were boring, and in true crime, boring is often the best disguise. The victims, though no one would call them that at first, were women who passed briefly through his life, neighbors, co-workers, romantic partners who described Daniel as attentive but distant, someone who listened closely yet revealed almost nothing about himself. And when asked about his past, he always laughed and said it was easier to start fresh than explain old mistakes. The first confirmed victim was Emily Carter, a freelance graphic designer who met Daniel through a local networking event in 2016, and to the outside world their relationship seemed uneventful, even dull, until Emily vanished after telling a friend she planned to confront Daniel about inconsistencies in his stories. Police initially treated her disappearance as voluntary, a mistake that would later haunt the investigation, because Daniel Foster had already begun stepping fully into his second life. Unknown to his neighbors, Daniel traveled frequently under another name, Michael Reed, a name attached to short-term rentals, burner phones, and a shadow trail of cash withdrawals across 3 states. And under this identity he was louder, crueler, more impulsive, a man who thrived in anonymity and chaos, frequenting bars near highways, forming intense connections that burned out quickly and sometimes violently. The crime that finally exposed everything occurred on January 11, 2019, when Sarah Miller, a real estate agent Daniel had been dating for 6 months, invited him over to discuss what she called uncomfortable discoveries, including documents found in his home office bearing a different name and photos of women he claimed not to know, and according to forensic evidence. The conversation escalated rapidly. Voices raised, chairs moved, glass shattered, until Sarah attempted to leave and never made it past the kitchen doorway. The cause of death was blunt force trauma followed by manual strangulation, a personal, deliberate act that indicated rage rather than panic. And yet when police arrived, Daniel was nowhere to be found, his car abandoned 10 miles away, wiped clean, the keys placed carefully on the hood, as if he wanted the vehicle discovered. The investigation that followed was a maze of false starts and chilling revelations, with detectives first assuming Daniel had panicked and fled, only to realize that Daniel Foster, as a legal person, barely existed. His social security number linked to a deceased child from another state, his academic credentials fabricated, and his employment verified only through shell companies. As investigators dug deeper, Michael Reed began to emerge like a ghost, connected to Emily Carter's disappearance, and at least 3 other missing persons cases previously considered unrelated, all sharing similar patterns of brief relationships, sudden confrontation, and complete erasure. Surveillance footage placed Daniel or Michael, depending on the day, in multiple cities at once, thanks to carefully staggered travel and the use of identical clothing, a tactic that confused early attempts at tracking his movements. One of the most disturbing moments in the investigation came when police recovered a storage unit rented under Michael Reed's name, containing meticulously organized boxes labeled with dates and initials, each holding personal items belonging to women he had known, photographs, jewelry, handwritten notes, trophies that suggested not only premeditation but ritual. For true crime analysts, this was the turning point, the moment the case shifted from isolated domestic homicide to serial predation. And the media descended on Brookvale, turning the quiet town into a backdrop for televised speculation and fear. Yet even as the evidence mounted, the man himself remained elusive, slipping across state lines, using cash, abandoning identities as easily as clothing. Until one mistake brought everything crashing down. In August 2020, over a year after Sarah Miller's murder, a routine traffic stop in New Mexico flagged a vehicle registered to Michael Reed. And when the driver presented identification, the officer noticed subtle discrepancies, a hesitation before answering basic questions, a nervous glance toward the glove compartment. And when backup arrived, the man bolted, leading police on a brief but chaotic chase that ended with his arrest. Fingerprints confirmed what detectives had long suspected. Daniel Foster and Michael Reed were the same person, and under interrogation, the man displayed a chilling calm, answering questions selectively, correcting investigators on minor details, and at one point remarking that keeping two lives separate was the only thing that ever made him feel in control. The trial that followed was a spectacle, with prosecutors laying out a narrative of deception and violence, presenting digital evidence, witness testimony, and expert analysis to argue that the defendant had constructed dual identities as a method of psychological compartmentalization, allowing him to commit acts he could never reconcile as one person. Defense attorneys attempted to introduce the possibility of dissociative disorders, suggesting that Daniel and Michael were psychologically distinct, but the jury was unconvinced, especially after hearing recordings in which the defendant casually discussed the thrill of being untouchable, of watching people trust him, while knowing they never truly could. In the end, the verdict was guilty on multiple counts, including first-degree murder, identity fraud, and obstruction of justice, and the sentence ensured he would never again step into either of the lives he had created. Public reaction was a mixture of relief and unease, with many questioning how someone could live among them, attend their events, share their streets, while hiding such darkness in plain sight. And for the families of the victims, justice was partial at best, as some questions would never be answered, including the fate of Emily Carter, whose body was never recovered. Even now, investigators believe there may be additional victims linked to Michael Reed, cases buried under different jurisdictions, names lost to time, waiting to be connected by a pattern only visible in hindsight. This dark case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about identity, trust, and how easily we accept the stories people tell us when they fit neatly into our expectations. Because Daniel Foster was never a monster in appearance, never the kind of villain that true crime documentaries warn us about. He was ordinary, deliberate, and patient. And that may be the most terrifying part of all. This has been Dark Case Files, a true crime story about a man who lived two lives and let one of them become deadly. And now we leave you with the question: if someone can hide this well for this long, how many others are still out there living quietly beside us, waiting for the moment their second life takes over? And if this case left you unsettled, stay with us. Subscribe to Dark Case Files for more true crime, more Dark Case Files, and more crime stories that prove the truth is often darker than fiction.